something nerds call a market failure, as in an industry that is way too expensive for both the consumers and the providers of a service. For parents, the annual cost of childcare was at an average of $9,977 before the pandemic. By one estimate, that number is now up to $14,117. In Indiana, the most average state, families with kids under 5 spend around 20% of their income just on childcare alone. And while you'd expect this to be the fault of Big Nanny strong-arming parents with their playroom cabal, it turns out that on the provider side, childcare workers aren't making diddly shit despite these rising costs. The mean average annual year salary for employees across the board is only $26,790 in America. And so, right about now, you're probably wondering just where the heck all that money is going. Was it all eaten by that money monster George Clooney tried to warn us about? Actually, kind of. Or rather, if you think of government regulations as a money monster, which in this case, in most cases, you should not do that. No, you see, the business of watching children is one that needs a lot of oversight for reasons that should be obvious. When you drop your child or pet ape disguised as a child off somewhere, it's nice to know that the place has proper fire safety, CPR certified employees, and doesn't just stick your baby and or ape in a basement drawer. This is why the law requires only a handful of kids per childcare worker so that each kid gets the proper amount of attention. And also probably why my own childcare business failed so quickly and dramatically. Super didn't know you couldn't let apes and babies play together, learned that the gross way. While there's probably a conversation out there about regulation reform, there's simply no getting around how expensive and regulated a childcare business needs to be. You're basically running a small school, something you may perhaps realize is a thing funded by state taxes, so why wouldn't we also do that with childcare? Why in the hell would we consider the act of watching over kids while adults go to work, to survive, a for-profit business that only some people can afford? After all, America likes babies, right? They certainly put up a stink if you accidentally feed one to an ape. People are always concerned about our dwindling population, and most politicians, and especially the GOP, are rock hard for families. They are supposedly the pro-life party after all. And while perhaps there was a time when a single parent could provide for a household, this is of course no longer the case. So the logical conclusion here is to either pay people way more money or make childcare extremely cheap, if not totally free. Now, I know I just mentioned conservatives, but I'm really not talking about this through the lens of any political ideology. Despite your views of the free market, the concept of childcare simply doesn't work when treated like a business. We're seeing this right now with the aforementioned market failure, and that problem is compounding into everyone's problem as places begin to rehire after the pandemic. You know how there's a very vocal push by both parties to reopen schools? Well, that's not just for the kids' sake, but an essential step in getting our economy back on track. The childcare industry, it turns out, is a linchpin to our whole system. As one study discovered, roughly 8% of the economic activity in Europe simply can't happen as long as kids remain at home where parents have to look after them. They predict that's the same here in the States. This, of course, most affects women, 1.6 million of which are currently unable to rejoin the workforce due to a lack of childcare. Now, this isn't an emotional plea. It's not a political viewpoint. This is just sexy numbers. And I bring up Europe because, as you probably already guessed, other countries have already figured this out. In countries like Norway and Iceland and Denmark, the government spends between $23,000 to $29,000 per year per child. Germany, New Zealand, Austria, and many more all spend a substantial amount in the teens of thousands on childcare subsidies as well. And countries like Ireland and the UK offer free preschool for some portion of the day. Meanwhile, the United States spends only $500 per child per year. That is it. It's not even enough to get them the good PS5. And that puts us, pretty much dead last. It seems bad and easily avoidable, because you know who else subsidized childcare? The United States in the past.
27% of Richmond shipbuilders were women. Feminine workers with small children inspired the founding of 35 nursery school units and 10 extended day care centers, which mothered over 1,400 youngsters at a time. On their way to work, parents left their hopefuls at one of the nursery schools, knowing that the daily routine, commencing with a physical checkup and followed by organized play, would make their children both healthy and happy.
Thanks for that, old-timey voiceover man. Now, you might recall that our nation's ladies were once sent to fill in the jobs unoccupied by men fighting in World War II. During this era, the idea of women, or dames as they were scientifically classified at the time, was that they traditionally did not go to work. This was both due to a breathtaking system of sexism and also the fact that we had an economy where you could, work at a gas station and afford a house and a family. Wear that stupid milkman hat and turn crankshafts, and that would afford you a middle-class lifestyle. But when the war happened, Congress quickly realized that someone had to watch all these shitty kids while the moms were off riveting tanks and whatnot, and so they used the Lanham Act to create fully funded universal childcare. Not only was it available 6 days a week, but it cost families less than 12 cents per day, which is around $12 today. And boy, it was really effective. In total, looking after an estimated 550,000 to 600,000 children before the subsidies were ended in 1946. After that, we quietly went back to the same system as before, pretending the whole subsidized childcare thing didn't happen, like some kind of super kinky one-night stand. And yet today, it appears that we're in a similar situation where both parents have to be away from home during the day. So I guess the question is, why didn't we do anything between then and now? Well,
the last time the U.S. government seriously considered childcare policy was in 1971. But President Nixon vetoed it, saying a national childcare system would weaken American families.
Yeah, it was Nixon. Of course it was Nixon, or Reagan, or Clinton. No president would be a surprise, I guess is my point. But this was Nixon. The 1971 Bipartisan Comprehensive Child Development Act would have created a national network of federally funded child care centers that would provide meals and medical checkups for kids whose parents had to work. The program would have been optional for families and subsidized based on their income. At the time, the budget was $2 billion, and as I mentioned, was deemed bipartisan and passed by Congress, only to be ultimately vetoed by our first modern crime president. And while I didn't really want to make this about politics, the reason Nixon did this was purely ideological. This is according to Nixon's then speechwriter Pat Buchanan, who said the goal wasn't to simply reject it over the cost, but push back against the, quote, Sovietization of American children, and to bury the idea of a national childcare entitlement. And it worked! After Gerald Ford became president, the idea was once again resurrected, only for members of Congress to be flooded with angry letters from people accusing them of attacking the American family by helping American families, apparently. Because, of course, that's what it all boils down to. The resistance here isn't logical, but built on an extremely antiquated idea that a child should be raised by a mommy and a daddy, or more specifically, a stay-at-home mommy, lest they become some kind of knife-wielding alleyway criminal. And everything I've talked about here, this resistance to the cold, hard fact that women have jobs, the low pay for healthcare employees, and the inability to pay much attention to the issue, really follows a pattern when you realize who, statistically, it affects the most.
About 97% of early educators are women. About 40% are women of color. And the majority of women are Black, brown, and immigrant women who are doing this work.
That's the director of the Center for the Study of Childcare Employment at UC Berkeley, pinpointing a very important detail to all of this. The resistance to investing in infant and childcare is both subconsciously and deliberately rooted in good old-fashioned American misogyny. Despite being supported by 60% of voters, certain good old country boys really want us to think that childcare subsidies are some elitist idea being pushed on the working class family. This survey that J.D. Vance posted, by the way, simply says that most working class parents prefer having one of them stay home and watch the child, without the context that perhaps it's because childcare is f***ing expensive and that's why they'd rather do it themselves. And this is what he used to prove that people don't want affordable childcare. It's just so very transparently ill-informed and built upon this fantasy of a traditional American family where the mommy tends to the children while the dad goes to work. But instead of facing the reality of our current workforce, or the fact that wages are too low to provide for a family on a single income, the idea here is to backwards engineer a government that doesn't help its people in order to encourage a specific family structure that's economically extinct. It's the abstinence-only sex education approach, where you completely ignore the problem and act like shutting your eyes and ears will make it go away. In short, since they believe that a traditional American family is a stay-at-home mom mom and a working dad, they can't support any idea that recognizes that this isn't the case anymore. Even though it's super, super, super not the case. And so anyone acting like we shouldn't have subsidized childcare or that families don't want it simply aren't operating from a logical perspective and should probably be ignored and perhaps not be given political power or honestly have their book adapted into a film